Greetings. So you may have seen in the past couple days that the New York Times put out a list of the best books of the 21st century, according to them. The list was voted on by a bunch of authors and writers and critics, and if you look at the list, there's certainly some great books on there. Some of the books on that list I've read and adore. However, I think the general consensus, like on TikTok and YouTube and other places where people talk about this stuff, is that the list is like a little stuffy. It's a little like self-important. It's just not very fun, to be honest. There is a severe lack of like science fiction presence on the list. There's a severe lack of fantasy, and the stuff that they have picked in those realms are very sort of like, I have something to say type of books, which is fine. You know, there's definitely a place for those type of books. But with that said, in keeping with what a lot of people have done in response to this list, is I'm going to show you what I think are the 10 best books of the 21st century, according to me. I think anyone's list in trying to figure out what the best books of the 21st century are is kind of a futile endeavor in a lot of ways. I've read a lot of books in the 21st century, but I don't think I've read even like a tenth of the ones that were on the list. And you know, everyone's reading taste is different. You kind of fall into different niches depending on what your interests are, so take this list with a grain of salt, but feel free to let me know what you like, what you're interested in, what speaks out to you on this list, and drop your list in the comments below if you want to as well. So, without further ado, and these are in no particular order. It would be really hard to rank these at all, so they are just the order in which I stacked them on my desk. So, first up is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I love this book so much. I read this in 2022, I guess is when it came out. I had bought it and then I took it on a road trip to go see my best friend in LA. And I remember reading this on her balcony and at the beach. And then I think I finished it when I got home, but there's just something so beautiful about this book. It's essentially about two people who meet when they're kids and they're both sort of like ill and dealing with like a sickness. They become friends, they bond, and then they grow apart as the years go on, but they sort of reconnect with each other later on, and they decide to start a video game company together. I don't want to say much more than that, other than that it is really compelling. The story itself is great. It gets really emotional. I think even if you're someone who's not into video games, like I'm not really much of a video game person, you'll still get a lot out of this. There's certainly some sort of like nerd culture things that you might understand better if you are a video game person while you're reading this. But with that said, I mean, I think this thing sort of stands on its own as a really beautiful work about two people who care about each other a lot and sort of the complications of knowing each other for that amount of time and working with each other. So yeah, highly recommend. All of these books are a 10 out of 10, this one especially. Yeah, I'm really excited to read whatever she comes out with next. I had never read anything else by her before, but this is incredible, so definitely check this one out. The next book on my list is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I read this kind of as like the pandemic was, if not wrapping up, but at least sort of coming to a place where we could like go outside again and see our friends, and you know, most people I know were vaccinated and all that. You know, this was written well before the pandemic, but it is about a pandemic that happens and sort of like erases most of the people from the earth. But the way this book is written is just so special. Like, it's really calm, it's very slow, but not in any sort of boring way. It has this sense of like sentimentality and nostalgia to it that is it's just so calming and relaxing, even though like what these people are facing in this book is horrendous. So reading this as like our pandemic was sort of, you know, still processing or coming to a close or whatever you want to call it, was just a super powerful experience. And, you know, I'm sure if I read this book at any other time, it would have been really good too. But to read this sort of like in the context of what was going on in my life and the people around me, it just sort of hit me like a ton of bricks. I will say too that if you like this book, if you end up reading it, her other work is also really, really good. I've also read The Glass Hotel and Sea of Tranquility. Sea of Tranquility in particular is like excellent. And if you read this and The Glass Hotel and then read Sea of Tranquility kind of has some weird like metafiction aspects to it. So Yeah, incredible author. I will always tune in to like whatever she has to say, and whatever book she puts out next. So incredible book. Please check it out, especially if you have lived through the pandemic, which most of you have, I'm sure, unless you were very, very little, and you're probably not watching my video. Or this video is like 30 years old and you're watching it anyway, which would be crazy. The next book on my list is sort of cheating because it's not necessarily a book. It is more of a collection of comic books, but with that said, I think if you're a comic book reader or you're not a comic book reader, you should still check it out because it's just so breathtaking and beautiful. I don't have the physical copy with me, but I'll put it right here. It is Saga, Compendium 1 by Brian K. Vaughan. The best way I can put it is, imagine if like Star Wars didn't suck ass, like if it was just really good instead and was more focused on this sort of like Romeo and Juliet type of thing where there's like two star-crossed lovers that really aren't supposed to be together and the lengths in which they'll go to keep their family together. The illustrations are stunning. The writing is really, really good. It has sort of like an edgy quality to it without being sort of like an edgelord type of thing. It has just enough bite to it to where it's not like obnoxious. I bought it on Kindle and read it on my iPad. This is a book that I've actually bought for other people, especially if they're trying to get into comics. The one thing I will say is that it's still ongoing. They're essentially a little bit more than halfway through the story they're trying to tell. I know they wrote the whole first compendium and then took like 3 years off and now they're writing it again. So keep that in mind if you want to check it out. But with that said, I don't really mind just sort of like letting the issues stack up and then I'll get to it when I get to it. I think Compendium 1 ends in a place where you won't feel weird about it ending. And if anything, it'll make you want to stick around for the rest of it whenever it comes out. So yeah, Saga, just truly incredible. Shout out to my friend James and my friend Connor, actually, for getting me into that. My two book club buddies. Just really, really good. Definitely among like the best comic book series I've ever read. So yeah. The next book on my list is also cheating to a certain extent, but it is Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang. I don't know what to say. This is like maybe the best thing ever. It's a collection of short stories. If you don't know who Ted Chiang is, he is primarily a science fiction writer, but some of his stories don't necessarily exist in a science fiction realm. Some of them are a little more fantasy, some of them are a little bit more grounded. But the way he writes is just so contained and subtle and efficient. And I know that's like a weird way to describe some writing as like efficient, but there's just like no wasted words in his stories. It's just sort of hard to ignore how well written these are. Some of these stories I like better than others. The one that really stands out to me when I think back on reading this is a story called Understand. It's essentially just about two dudes who like kind of do that limitless thing where like their brain power becomes, you know, unencumbered by the limitations of human psychology or whatever. And they just kind of start like fucking with each other. That makes it sound kind of silly. And in a way it is silly, but it's also just like incredible. It's also just like the most entertaining thing you'll ever read. But that is sort of a misrepresentation of why I like this collection, though. What I really like about it is that even though he's writing in a science fiction genre, there's nothing more human feeling than his writing. This book is amazing. He also has another collection called Exhalation, which I have on my shelf up here as well. When we started the book club that I'm in, this was actually the first book that we ever read for the book club, and it's funny like going through all these different short story collections since this one, and some of them are great. I think some of them like almost stack up against this, but for my money, I think this is still like the best collection that I've ever read. Kind of like all of these books that I'm going to recommend, I have like bought copies of this for people just to be like, please read it. You don't even read, but like you need to read this, please. So yeah, I think the world would be a better place if you read this and everyone you know read it. So please read it. The next book on my list is Babble by R.F. Kuang. I've already talked about this book a little bit on the channel, but this one really just took my breath away. It's got kind of like an academic bent to it. It's about these, not kids, but like young adults going to school at Oxford in the 1800s. And the conceit of the story is that there is magic in the world, and it is sort of imbued into these bars of silver that are then used throughout like society by the government to sort of make things function better. So you would embed bars of silver into the railroad tracks, and it would make the trains move much more efficiently, or you would like embed it into the walls of your house to like keep intruders away and stuff like that. It is fantasy. It does talk a lot about magic and things like that, but it's also like about linguistics. It's about power and politics and race and identity and sort of how you fit into a society that isn't made for you. Yeah, I won't say much more than that, especially because I've talked about this book on the channel before, but I bought this book in Scotland when I visited earlier this year, and I read most of it just on the plane on the way back. Just really eye-opening, really beautiful, and if you like this one, you'll probably like a lot of R.F. Kuang's other books too, so check it out. Next on my list is the only nonfiction entry in my list of favorite books, at least for the 21st century, and that is Crying in Hmart by Michelle Zauner. That is Crying in Hmart by Michelle Zauner. You might know Michelle Zauner as the singer, songwriter, lead person for the band Japanese Breakfast. She's not actually Japanese, she's Korean. This is a memoir she wrote about taking care of her mom while her mom was going through a cancer battle. If you are someone who likes books by musicians, it's an incredible book. If you're someone who has had someone in your life go through cancer, it's an amazing book. And also if you're just someone who wants to, enjoy some incredible writing, you'll really enjoy it. It's really heart-wrenching. It's definitely not like a pleasant read at times, but really well worth it. A lot of what she explores is sort of like her relationship to her mom through food and how sort of integral that was to their relationship. I'm sure a lot of people can identify with that, when we think about what our favorite meals are from when we were a kid. They were probably made by your mom. And as someone whose mom has passed from cancer, this just like really resonated with me in a way that most other nonfiction hasn't for me. So yeah, really good. Crying in Hmart. You will probably cry in your room reading this. So, proceed with caution. Up next on my list is Death's End by Cixin Liu. This is the third book in the Three Body Problem series. You might know that series because there is a Netflix adaptation that has come out recently. You also might just know about it because you're a nerd like me. This series and this book in particular is pretty much the best science fiction I've ever read. It's really hard to talk about this series without spoiling anything. One of the very first video, I think the very first video I did on this channel was me talking about Three Body Problem, and I got a lot of people in the comments sort of yelling at me for spoiling things, so I will say nothing about the plot, so you can't get mad at me. All I will say is that if you read Three Body Problem, if you read the second one, which is called The Dark Forest, and then you get to this one, oh boy, my fucking cats are over there wrestling with the blinds, so sorry about the noise. If you get to this third book, it's the best one out of all three, I think. The places that it goes are just mind-bending. I read these books during the pandemic, in 2020, I think, and it just broke my brain. And these are thick boys. These are thick books, and I just couldn't put it down, honestly. Yeah, if you like science fiction, if you want to read something that was written outside of the English language, if you want to just sort of break your brain for a while, you can't go wrong with this. Read the other two first. I think if you read this without the other two, it wouldn't make much sense. But yeah, this is one of my favorite books of all time. It would be in my top 5, I think. Just beautiful. Can't get enough. So, sort of tangentially related to Three Body Problem and Death's End is the author Ken Liu. Ken Liu was actually the translator on Three Body Problem and Death's End and translated the work from Chinese into English. Turns out he actually writes books too, and they're amazing. The first thing I ever read by him was his short story collection, The Paper Menagerie, which I probably could have put on this list too, but I didn't want to do more than one book by any one author. His short stories are amazing. He also has a really cool economy of words like Ted Chiang does. But the book that I'm choosing to share with you today is The Wall of Storms, which is book 2 in the Dandelion Dynasty series that he's written. It is an epic fantasy series set in a world that is sort of based around like 500 CE China, but it is its own world. Ken Liu refers to the genre as silk punk, and I think there's a reason for that. There is an emphasis on technology and how it moves society forward, but instead of like sprockets and rust and like steampunky aesthetic kind of stuff, it's much more informed by like silk and bamboo and like traditional sort of Chinese mechanics. The first book in the series is called The Grace of Kings, which I like a lot. Hey, stop it. Hey. The first book in the series is called The Grace of Kings, which I like a lot. However, that one's a little bit of a slog to get through. It reads kind of almost like a textbook. And having gotten farther in the series, it almost is sort of a precursor to all the other stuff that goes on in the series. It's almost like a prequel, even though it's the first book. But with that said, if you can make your way through Grace of Kings and you want to keep going, Wall of Storms is amazing. It's really big. It's a very thick book. I think the third and fourth book are even longer, which is crazy, but I got to like the second half of this book, and then I think I read the rest of it in like 3 days or something like that. All the characters are incredible. It is sort of a lot to keep track of, kind of in the way that like Game of Thrones is like that. There's a list of characters in the beginning of the book if you get lost or forget who someone is, but it's well worth your time. Yeah, Ken Liu is just an incredible author. I'll recommend him to anyone I know. If you like science fiction, if you like fantasy, if you like sort of historical fantasy, yeah, definitely check out The Dandelion Dynasty. This one in particular is amazing. So get through Grace of Kings, get to this one, and then just bask in the glory of the words. So, yeah. The second to last book I'm going to talk about, I'm not really going to talk too much about because like half of the videos on my channel are about this author, but that book is 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. This is a big old weird book. It's very long. It's very tedious at times, at least according to some people. I wouldn't even necessarily read this if you haven't read any of Haruki Murakami's other books, but if you're a trooper and you can sort of make it through his other more digestible things, you should definitely check this out. I'm not going to say anything about this. I've talked about Haruki Murakami way too much. Some people hate this book, and it kind of makes me like it even more, to be honest. I've read it twice. There's just something about it. There's something about the worlds that he creates that are just like so real and unreal at the same time. Reading his books has made me sort of eternally fascinated with Japan, and I really want to go, especially after watching Perfect Days recently. If you haven't seen Perfect Days, you should check out that movie. I did a video about it recently if you want to check that out by clicking that little thing over there. Yeah, I would actually recommend starting, if we're talking about 21st century books, with Kafka on the Shore, which is another Haruki Murakami book. That one's probably a little bit easier to get into. Maybe even a better book. I don't know. This thing is sort of excessive. The ideas that he's playing around with in here are kind of creepy and gross and icky, to say the least. But I think there's something really compelling about an author that you like that's just sort of going for it. And he's really going for it in this one. Not for everyone, but it is for me. And that's okay. Yeah, I need to go to Japan real bad. The last book that I'm going to mention, I actually don't have a physical copy of anymore. I got this book when I was like 12 years old, I think. I've read it 3 or 4 times. I think I loaned my copy to my dad, and he lost it at a Little League game that he brought a book to. So thanks, Dad. I'm really surprised I actually don't have a copy of it. That is kind of surprising to me. Maybe I do, and maybe I'm just like not looking hard enough. Yeah, I just did a quick once-over, and I definitely don't have it. But the book I'm referring to is Life of Pi by Jan Martel. This is a book that I don't think was really, like, obscure before the movie came out, but certainly I think most people know about it because of the movie, directed by Ang Lee. I think it came out in, like, 2011 or 2012. I haven't seen the movie in a long time. I remember it being, like, pretty good, but the book is something that has stuck with me since I read it when I was a kid. It's essentially about this boy growing up in India, and he's sort of trying to discover, like, who he is. You know, he has sort of a conflict in what faith he should be following. He sort of meets with these different religious leaders. His family owns a zoo in India, and so he's around animals a lot, and his family decides to move to Canada. And so on this sort of like ocean liner that they're taking across the ocean, they run into a little problem in that the boat sinks and he gets separated from his parents. He escapes relatively unscathed, but essentially he has to live in this like tiny boat for like days and days and weeks and months, alone with just a tiger from the zoo. I don't want to say much more than that. I think that Jan Martel's writing is really unique. He has a couple other books that I've read. One of them is called The High Mountains of Portugal, and the other one is called Beatrice and Virgil. His stuff is like very allegorical. They almost feel like fables in a traditional sense. They're almost like fairy tales with a hidden message in them. Not that they're hidden. I think they're actually very sort of plainly displayed when you think about it. Life of Pi was also just a book that got me back into reading when I was a kid. It's a book that my mom read. I sort of alluded to my dad trying to read it. And it was also given to me by like one of my best friends when I was a kid. It was actually a birthday present, I think, on my 12th birthday. So just a lot of fond memories with that book. I haven't read it in quite some time. I think I last read it when I was in college, but I should probably crack it open again. I have nothing but fond memories of the book. And even though I don't have it here, you know, here's the cover. Yeah, just can't recommend that book highly enough. You should probably check out his other books too. That's an author that I really bonded over with my mom as well. And yeah, it just sort of barely, you know, skates in under that 21st century label. I think it came out in like 2001. So yeah, that's my list. Anyway, thank you for listening to me. Please tell me what you think your favorite books of the 21st century are in the comments. Feel free to tell me if you hate my picks. That's okay. We're allowed to disagree. Reading is subjective. So check out my other videos. Go listen to my band. Check out the short videos that I do. You can follow me on TikTok and Instagram and any place that is sort of shoving video content into your face. So yeah, have a good one. I love you. Bye-bye.